C and Tioga Streets, North Philadelphia. A factory complex so large it had its own internal streets, its own shift changes, its own weather of noise and heat and steel. If you turned a radio dial in an American living room between 1930 and 1950, there was roughly a 1 in 3 chance the set in front of you was built inside these walls. By 1934, Philco controlled approximately 30% of every radio sold in the United States. This was the company that turned radio from a hobbyist gadget into household furniture. It sat in kitchens, living rooms, bedrooms, from Philadelphia to Portland. Philco survived the Depression, survived a world war, survived the jump from batteries to broadcasting to television to transistors to computers. A company with that record, that reach, that deep inside American life should have lasted forever. It did not. In the first half of 1961, Philco reported losses of roughly $4.4 million on sales of $196 million. By December of that year, the entire company was sold to Ford Motor Company. By 2000, Plant 2 was rubble, and the lot was a junkyard. Not a corrupt executive, not a single catastrophic product, not foreign competition undercutting prices. None of the usual explanations fit. A line supervisor with 20 years at C and Tioga could walk the production floor and hear a misaligned chassis by the rattle it made on the conveyor before it reached the next station. Could feel a transformer running hot through the vibration in the workbench. Could smell bad solder from 30 feet away on a line running 1,000 units and trace it to the exact iron. That knowledge was not automated. It was not replaced. The industry simply moved on to a world where no one stood close enough to the line to need it. How does a company that dominated American radio for 2 decades lose its grip on the living room? How does an entire industry let manufacturing knowledge built over generations drain out of a single factory? And what disappears from your own life when the people who knew how to build the things you depended on are never asked to build them again? This is the story of what happens when a company built for one kind of certainty tries to survive an age that punishes everything except focus. The rise, the reign, and the silent lot at C and Tioga. This is Philco. Let's start at the beginning. Philadelphia, 1892. A small outfit called Helios Electric opens a shop. The product is carbon arc lamps, street lights, factory lights, the kind of work nobody notices until the lights go out. No glamour, no grand vision, just a guy selling illumination to people who needed to see. The business struggled, changed hands, changed direction. By 1906, it had a new name, the Philadelphia Storage Battery Company, and a new address in North Philadelphia. The product was no longer lamps, it was batteries. Big, heavy industrial storage batteries, the kind that powered telephone switching stations and early automobiles. The kind of product you never think about, never admire, never talk about at dinner. Remember that, because the company that would one day put its name on millions of radios and televisions learned its craft, making something nobody loved. But here is what battery work teaches you. It teaches you that tolerances matter. That a production schedule is a promise. That if your battery fails inside a telephone exchange at 2 in the morning, nobody cares about your excuses. You deliver a reliable product on time at the agreed cost, or you lose the contract. Period. Done. The men running this operation were not dreamers. They were manufacturers. They thought in shifts, output rates, and reject percentages. And they were getting good at it. Very good. The kind of good that does not make headlines, but builds the muscle a company needs when an opportunity arrives fast. By 1919, the company started stamping a shorter name on its products. Philco. Not a marketing breakthrough, a practical decision. Philadelphia Storage Battery Company did not fit on a casing. Philco did. Now here is where the story turns. The early 1920s. Radio is exploding across America. not as a toy for hobbyists anymore, as a genuine consumer phenomenon. Families want music in the living room, news in the kitchen, a boxing match on a Saturday night. They want the world inside their home. And to make that happen, they need radio sets. And radio sets need power. Most early radios ran on batteries, clunky, expensive, messy batteries that needed constant replacing. Every radio owner in America was dealing with the same frustration. The set sounds great for a few weeks, then the batteries weaken, the signal fades, and you are back at the store buying replacements. Someone at Philco looked at that problem and saw a fortune. The company developed a socket power device. Plug your radio into the wall. No more batteries, no more mess. Just electricity from the socket and music from the speaker. They called it the Philco Socket Power, and they priced it for the mass market. It sold over 1 million units in 3 years. 1 million from a battery company? In a product category they had barely touched. That number changed everything inside the building at North Philadelphia, because it proved something intoxicating. If you can manufacture at scale, keep your costs brutal, and push product through a wide distribution network, you can enter a market you have never been in before and win. The lesson was thrilling. It was also a trap. But in 1927, it felt like pure vindication. That year, Philco made the leap. Stop powering other people's radios. Start building your own. The first Philco radio sets hit the market in 1928. They were not the best engineered sets available. They were not the prettiest. They were affordable, reliable, and everywhere. By 1930, Philco sold roughly 616,000 radios, about $34 million in gross revenue. By 1934, 1 in 3 radios sold in the United States had Philco on the dial. 1 in 3. From a company that had been making batteries 6 years earlier. The factory at C and Tioga was roaring. The assembly lines were full. The orders were flooding in faster than production could fill them. And inside that building, a very specific belief was taking root. A belief that would carry Philco to the top of American industry, and then, slowly, quietly, over the course of 20 years, destroy it. The belief was this: if we can build it cheaper and faster than anyone else, we can win any market we enter. Radio proved them right. Everything after radio would prove them wrong. Here is what Philco did that no other radio company did as well. It made the radio disappear. Not literally. But before Philco, a radio looked like equipment. Dials, wires, exposed tubes, the kind of thing a man kept in his workshop and fiddled with on weekends. After Philco, a radio looked like furniture, warm wood, curved arches, cathedral-style cabinets that stood in the living room like they had always been there. You did not need to understand electricity to want one. You just needed to want your house to feel modern. That was the trick. And it was not an accident. Somebody inside Philco made a decision that the radio industry had not yet figured out. Stop selling to tinkerers. Start selling to wives. Start selling to families. Make the thing beautiful enough that a woman would want it in her parlor, affordable enough that a working man could put it on layaway, and reliable enough that nobody had to call a repairman twice. The cathedral sets were the signature. Those pointed arches and carved wood panels turned a piece of electronics into a piece of domestic identity. A Philco in your living room said something about you. It said you were modern, but not reckless, practical, but not cheap. It said you belonged to the new America, the one where the president's voice came through a speaker and a family could sit together on a Tuesday night and hear an orchestra play in New York City. By the mid-1930s, Philco had become something larger than a manufacturer. It had become a habit. The evening routine in millions of American homes now included turning the dial on a Philco. Dinner, dishes, radio. The kids on the floor, the parents in their chairs, the warm glow of the tubes behind the fabric speaker cover. Philco had not just entered the living room. It had rearranged the living room around itself. And the numbers were staggering. The company's own historical narrative would later claim 24 consecutive years as the leading radio seller in America and total sales of over 30 million sets. Those are promotional figures, not independently audited, so take them with appropriate skepticism. But even if you cut them in half, the point holds. This was not a brand competing for market share. This was a brand that owned the category. Now here is the part that matters for what comes later. When you dominate a market this completely, something happens inside the company that is almost impossible to resist. You start to believe the method is the magic, not the product, not the timing, not the specific conditions that made radio the right bet at the right moment. The method, the assembly line discipline, the cost control, the distribution network. You look at your success and you think, we did not get lucky. We have a system, and our system can win anywhere. The executives at Philco looked at their radio empire and reached exactly that conclusion. They had taken a battery company and turned it into a consumer electronics giant in under a decade. The system worked, and if it worked for radio, why would it not work for everything else? That question sounds reasonable. It is the most dangerous question in business. But the danger was invisible in 1936, or 1938, or 1940. The factory was loud. Philco was hiring. The dealer network stretched across the country, and in 1934, the company had locked down something that made the empire feel even more invincible. Ford Motor Company. An exclusive contract to supply audio components for Ford vehicles. Car radios, not a side project. A partnership with one of the biggest industrial names in the world. The same assembly lines at C and Tioga that were building living room radios were now building dashboard radios for Ford cars. Think about what that feels like inside a company. You are already the king of home radio. Now you are inside America's cars too. The brand is everywhere. The factory is expanding. New buildings at the complex. New production lines. New hires. The plant at C and Tioga is starting to feel less like a factory and more like a district. Its own streets, its own rhythms, its own population of workers and engineers and managers moving through a complex that keeps growing because the orders keep growing. And then, in 1932, something even more remarkable. Philco started operating an experimental television station from the plant itself, broadcasting test signals into the Philadelphia air. Television, in 1932. Most Americans had never heard the word. Philco was already transmitting pictures. Stop and sit with that for a moment. A company that had mastered radio, that was supplying Ford with car audio, that was now experimenting with television a full 15 years before most families would own a set. This company had every advantage imaginable. Manufacturing, distribution, engineering, brand trust, first mover research in the next major technology. Every advantage. And it still was not going to be enough. But nobody standing inside that factory in 1938 could have known that. The noise was too loud, the confidence was too thick, and the war that was about to change everything had not yet arrived. September 1939. War breaks out in Europe. By December 1941, America is in it, and Philco gets a new customer, the United States military. The transition was fast. The same assembly lines that had been building radios for living rooms and dashboards were retooled for military production. Radar components, communication systems, proximity fuses, electronic equipment that soldiers and sailors would depend on in combat. The factory at C and Tioga did not slow down during the war. It sped up. This is where Philco proved something important about itself. The manufacturing discipline that had made cheap radios possible turned out to be exactly what wartime production demanded. Reliable equipment, massive volume, tight tolerances, on-time delivery. The military did not care if your cabinet was pretty. It cared if your radar worked at 3 in the morning on a destroyer in the North Atlantic. Philco could deliver that. Thousands of workers, multiple shifts. Production quotas that would have seemed insane 5 years earlier met and exceeded. The complex at C and Tioga was no longer a radio factory. It was a war machine, and the people inside it knew they were building something that mattered beyond profit margins. The war did something else to Philco, something quieter and more dangerous than anyone realized at the time. It taught the company that it could be more than a consumer electronics brand. It could be a defense contractor. It could build complex military systems. It could work with the government on classified projects and win contracts worth millions. The battery company that became a radio company had now become a military electronics company too. 3 identities, 3 sets of capabilities. 3 reasons to believe the system could handle anything. The war ended, the soldiers came home, and America went on the biggest spending spree in its history. Here is the moment where every instinct inside Philco said the same thing: expand. The post-war consumer market was exploding. Millions of young families needed everything: homes, cars, appliances, entertainment. And Philco had the brand, the factory space, the dealer network, and the confidence to go after all of it. So it did. Refrigerators, air conditioners, freezers. The logic seemed bulletproof. American families already trusted the Philco name on their radio. Why would they not trust it on their refrigerator? The dealers who sold Philco radios could sell Philco appliances through the same showrooms. The factory could add production lines. The brand could stretch. Meanwhile, the defense business kept growing. The Cold War was creating a permanent military economy, and Philco wanted its share. Government contracts for communication systems, electronic warfare, missile guidance. Lucrative, prestigious, steady. And then transistors. Philco invested heavily in semiconductor research, developing proprietary transistor technology. This was the building block of everything that would come next in electronics. Philco saw that, invested real money, built real capability. And then computers, large-scale computing systems, government contracts, competing against IBM and others for a piece of what everyone knew would be an enormous market. Count the businesses: radios, television, car audio, refrigerators, air conditioners, freezers, defense electronics, transistors, computers, 9 product lines, 1 company, 1 balance sheet. At C and Tioga, the complex had become something that no longer resembled a factory in any normal sense. It was a city. Engineering departments for different technologies, testing facilities for military equipment, production floors for consumer goods, experimental labs for semiconductors. By 1952, Philco had built a highly mechanized television production plant right there in the complex. The most advanced TV manufacturing facility they could design, sitting alongside radio lines and appliance production and defense work. Thousands of people passed through those gates every morning. They worked in different buildings on different products for different markets, but they all carried the same badge: Philco. And the badge meant something. It meant steady work, good wages, a company that was going somewhere. But where exactly? That was the question nobody was asking loudly enough, because the answer, if anyone had been honest about it, was troubling. Philco was going everywhere, and everywhere is not a destination. It is a way of avoiding a choice. By the late 1950s, the electronic and defense side of the business had grown to represent roughly 34% of total sales. Management expected 40% the following year. The consumer side was under pressure. Appliance competition was fierce. Television margins were thinning. Radio was mature. And the one competitor that should have worried Philco most was not spread across 9 product lines. RCA had made a choice, a clear, aggressive, unambiguous choice: television. RCA was going to own television the way Philco had once owned radio. One product, total commitment, everything else secondary. Philco looked at the same landscape and chose differently. It chose everything: Radios and refrigerators and missiles and transistors and computers and television, all at once, all from the same overtaxed balance sheet, all managed by the same executives who were already stretched across more decisions than any management team could handle well. The factory was louder than ever. More buildings, more workers, more product lines, more complexity. And underneath all that noise, something was going wrong that the noise made impossible to hear. The company that once knew exactly what it was had become a company that was trying to be everything. And trying to be everything is the most expensive way to become nothing. Here is what makes the television story painful. Philco was not late to television. It was early, earlier than almost anyone. 1932. Experimental broadcasts from the plant at C and Tioga. Test signals pushed into the Philadelphia air while most Americans had never seen a television set, let alone imagined owning one. Philco engineers were building transmitters, testing receivers, refining picture quality a full 2 decades before television became a mass-market product. 1933. Philco secures a commercial television license. This is not a small thing. The federal government is handing out permission to broadcast television signals, and Philco is on the list. Right there at the front of the line, alongside the biggest names in American electronics. 1934. A highly mechanized television production plant opens at C and Tioga. State-of-the-art. State. Designed from the ground up to build TV sets at volume with the same assembly line efficiency that had made Philco the radio king. 1935. Larger picture tubes. UHF compatibility. Engineering ambition that said this company understands where television is going and intends to be there. Read that timeline and you would bet everything on Philco becoming the dominant name in American television. Research. Broadcasting experience. Manufacturing capability. A 20-year head start on the technology. Brand loyalty built across decades of radio dominance. Every single advantage lined up in a row. And none of it was enough. Because advantages do not win markets. Focus wins markets. And Philco did not have focus. It had 9 product lines. While Philco was building television sets alongside refrigerators and missile systems and computers, RCA was doing something simpler and more ruthless. RCA picked television and went all in, not television plus appliances, not television plus computers. Television, manufacturing, broadcasting, content, brand identity, dealer strategy, advertising. Every dollar and every decision pointed at one goal: own the living room. RCA understood something that Philco's management either did not see or refused to accept. Television was not another product line to add to the catalog. It was the next radio, the thing that would reorganize American life around itself. The company that owned television would own the home the way Philco had once owned it through radio. This was not a market you could dabble in while also selling freezers. This was a war, and wars are won by armies that show up with everything, not by armies that show up with a fraction of their strength because the rest is deployed somewhere else. Philco showed up with a fraction, a capable fraction, a well-engineered fraction, but a fraction. The result played out over years, not months. Philco made good television sets. Some were very good. The mechanized plant at C and Tioga was genuinely impressive. But good is not dominant. Good is the company that competes for second or third place while the leader sets prices, defines trends, and builds the brand association that becomes permanent in the consumer's mind. RCA became television, not a television company, television itself. When Americans thought about TV in the 1950s, they thought RCA, the way they had once thought Philco when they thought about radio. That association, once established, is almost impossible to break. Philco had learned that lesson from the winning side with radio. Now it was learning it from the losing side with television. And then came the Predicta. 1958. Philco introduces a television set that looks like nothing else on the market. A swivel screen on a separate base, space-age design, chrome and clean lines, and a silhouette that made every other TV in the showroom look like it belonged in your grandmother's attic. The Predicta was beautiful. It was daring. It was the kind of product that makes you think maybe this company still has something left. Maybe the old magic is not dead. The Predicta turned heads. It won attention. It became the kind of object that design magazines photograph and collectors hunt for decades later. But design does not fix a balance sheet. Later accounts associate the Predicta with reliability problems, overheating, service calls, warranty costs that ate into margins at exactly the moment Philco could least afford it. How much damage the Predicta specifically caused is debatable. Some historians treat it as a significant accelerant of the decline. Others see it as one more symptom of a company that was trying to do too many things with too little margin for error. Either way, the symbolism is hard to miss. The most futuristic television set of the 1950s came from a company that was running out of future. By 1960, the Predicta was discontinued, 2 years on the market. Beautiful, flawed, and gone. The Predicta is the kind of object historians love because it looks like destiny. A last brilliant flash from a dying star. But the star was not dying because of one product. It was dying because for over a decade it had been fighting the television war with one hand, while the other hand was busy building refrigerators and transistors and computers and missile systems. The factory at sea and Tioga still ran. The lines still moved. But the confidence that had once filled that building, the absolute certainty that Philco could win any market it entered, was gone. In its place was something more desperate. Not panic, not yet. But the grim arithmetic of a company that was spending more than it was earning across too many fronts and running out of room to pretend otherwise. The numbers were about to make that arithmetic impossible to ignore. There is a moment in every decline when the language changes. One quarter, the executives are talking about strategy, market position, long-term vision. The next quarter, the words are different. Losses, write-downs, restructuring. For Philco, that moment hit around 1960, and it hit from every direction at once. Start with appliances. The refrigerators, air conditioners, and freezers that had seemed like such a natural brand extension in the post-war boom were now dead weight. The appliance market had turned into a knife fight dominated by companies that did nothing but appliances. Frigidaire, General Electric, Whirlpool. Companies that woke up every morning thinking about refrigerators and went to bed every night thinking about refrigerators. Philco was thinking about refrigerators and radios and televisions and missiles and transistors and computers. You cannot outfight a specialist when you are spread across 9 fronts. Now, the computers. Philco had built real capability here, large-scale systems, government contracts, technical talent that understood computing at a deep level. And every bit of it was hemorrhaging money. Computer development in the late 1950s was extraordinarily expensive. The research costs were enormous. The sales cycles were long. The competition was IBM, which had more capital, more focus, and more patience than Philco could match, while simultaneously trying to fund 8 other businesses. The defense work was steady. Roughly 30% of Philco's total business came from government contracts, missile guidance, communication systems, electronic warfare, prestigious work, important work. But defense revenue has its own problems. Long procurement cycles, political uncertainty, cost structures that do not translate into consumer profit margins. You cannot use a missile contract to subsidize a failing refrigerator line forever. The transistor investment was real, but had not yet generated the returns that would justify the capital poured into it. The radio business was mature and flat. Television was competitive and margin thin. Every single business unit had a reasonable explanation for why it was underperforming, and every single explanation sounded plausible in isolation. Line them up together, and they spelled disaster. Local historical accounts describe Philco reaching a point of bankruptcy or near bankruptcy by 1960. The exact details vary by source, but the picture is consistent. A company that had once been the undisputed king of American radio was running out of money. Not because any one business failed catastrophically, because all of them needed more than the company could give. Then 1961 arrived, and the numbers became impossible to argue with. First quarter, losses of roughly $1.6 million. Management could still frame that as a bad quarter, a temporary setback. We will adjust. We will cut costs. The second quarter will be better. It was not better. By the end of the first half of 1961, Philco had lost approximately $4.4 million on sales of about $196 million. Think about that ratio. Nearly $200 million in revenue, and the company is still losing money. That is not a demand problem. That is a structural problem. The machine itself costs more to run than it generates. A cyclical downturn means the market is soft and you wait for it to recover. A structural crisis means your business model is broken and waiting makes it worse. Philco's crisis was structural. The company had built itself into a conglomerate without the financial depth of a conglomerate. It had the product lines of a company 3 times its size and the balance sheet of a company that could barely support half of them. Every dollar spent on a computer that did not sell was a dollar that could not go to television. Every dollar tied up in refrigerator inventory was a dollar that could not fund transistor research. Every dollar committed to a defense contract was a dollar locked into a payment schedule that did not care whether the consumer side was collapsing. The trap was total, and it was self-built. Nobody forced Philco to enter appliances. Nobody forced Philco to build computers. Nobody forced Philco to spread itself across 9 markets while its core consumer business was losing ground to focused competitors. Every expansion had been a choice. Every choice had been made by executives who believed the same thing the company had believed since the socket power days. If we can build it, we can win. They could build it. All of it? The factory at Sea and Tioga proved that every day. Radios came off one line, TVs came off another, appliances from a third, defense hardware from a fourth. The manufacturing capability was never the issue. The issue was that building is not winning. Manufacturing discipline gets you into a market. It does not guarantee you survive there. And by 1961, Philco was in 9 markets and surviving in none of them well enough to sustain the whole. The company that had once sold Americans the sound of confidence had lost confidence in its own ledger. The executives who had believed that scale could conquer anything were now staring at spreadsheets that said, "Scale without focus is just expensive failure." Somewhere, somebody had to make a call. Philco could not save itself. It did not have the capital, it did not have the time, and it did not have the clarity to choose which businesses to keep and which to kill, because killing any of them meant admitting that the expansion had been a mistake. So instead of choosing, Philco did what struggling companies often do. It waited for someone else to choose for them. That someone was in Detroit. December 11th, 1961, Ford Motor Company completes its acquisition of Philco. Read that sentence again. Ford, a car company, buying the company that had once defined American radio. The king of the living room, purchased by the king of the highway. If you had told a Philco engineer in 1934, the year Philco won the exclusive Ford audio contract, that in 27 years Ford would own the whole company, he would have laughed. Or maybe he would not have laughed. Maybe he would have just gone quiet. Ford did not buy Philco to save it. That is the first thing to understand. Ford bought Philco the way you buy a house for the land underneath it. The structure is old. The roof leaks. The plumbing is failing. But the lot is in the right location, and you have plans for something new. What Ford wanted was specific. Defense electronics. Space-age capability. satellite communication contracts, missile guidance systems, transistor technology, automotive electronics for the next generation of Ford vehicles, and engineers, hundreds of engineers who understood complex electronic systems at a level no one at Ford did. Notice what is missing from that list: radios, televisions, refrigerators. The entire consumer business that had made Philco a household name for 30 years was, to Ford, an afterthought. A line item to be managed, milked for whatever residual revenue it could produce, and eventually phased out when the brand loyalty dried up. The workers at C and Tioga found out what an acquisition feels like from the inside. It feels like nothing changes at first. Same badge, same gate, same parking lot, same shift. The lines keep moving. The products keep shipping. Your paycheck still clears. And then, slowly, the decisions start coming from somewhere else. A product line is consolidated. A department is reorganized. A building that was fully staffed last year now has an empty floor. The name changed first. Philco became Philco Ford. Two names bolted together like mismatched parts. One from Philadelphia, built on batteries and radios and the dream of putting technology in every living room. One from Detroit, built on automobiles and the cold logic of corporate acquisition. The hyphen between them was doing a lot of work. The consumer brand kept going for a while. It always does. Brand names are the last thing to die because they cost almost nothing to maintain. You stamp Philco Ford on a television set or a refrigerator, and some percentage of buyers still respond to the familiar name. It is not loyalty exactly. It is habit. And habits fade slowly enough that you can extract revenue from them for years. But the original Philco was over. The independent company that had risen from a lamp shop in 1892 to the #1 radio manufacturer in the country by 1930 was gone. Not bankrupt, absorbed, which is a different kind of ending, but no less final. Think about what absorption means for the people inside the building. When a company goes bankrupt, there is at least a clear ending. A date, a last day. A moment when everyone knows it is over. Absorption is slower and crueler. The ending happens in stages. A contract not renewed here, a transfer there, a retirement not replaced, a hallway that used to be full on a Monday morning that now echoes a little on a Thursday afternoon. Ford kept the useful parts. The defense division continued operating, rebranded and reorganized, doing work that had nothing to do with living rooms. The engineering talent was redirected toward Ford's priorities. The government contracts that had accounted for 30% of Philco's business were now Ford's government contracts, managed by Ford's strategy, serving Ford's future. The parts that were not useful to Ford got the treatment that surplus parts always get. Neglect, not dramatic neglect, not someone walking in and shutting off the lights, just the quiet, steady withdrawal of investment and attention that tells everyone inside the building exactly where they stand without anyone having to say it out loud. The Philco name drifted further from its origins. Over the years, it was licensed, borrowed, attached to products that had no connection to the company that James M. Skinner and his generation had built. A brand that once meant something specific, affordable quality, manufacturing discipline, the sound of the American living room, became a label, a word on a box, a ghost of a name that fewer and fewer people recognized with each passing year. Philadelphia felt the loss, not all at once, in layers, first the pride, then the jobs, then the buildings. The complex at C and Tioga did not shut down the day Ford signed the papers. It contracted, one building at a time, one shift at a time, the way a body loses warmth, extremities first, then the core. The people who had walked through those gates every morning, who had eaten lunch on the same bench for 20 years, who had told their children that they worked at Philco and had it mean something, those people watched the contraction happen in real time. They did not need a business analyst to tell them what was going on. They could see it in the empty parking spots. They could hear it in the quiet hallways. They could feel it in the way the building itself seemed to shrink around them as the work drained away. The factory was still standing, but the thing that had made it matter, the independent company with the independent will and the independent ambition, was gone. What remained was a building, and buildings without purpose are just waiting for the next decision. That decision was coming, and it would be made with a wrecking ball. Drive to C and Tioga Streets in North Philadelphia sometime in the year 2000. Park the car, step out, look around. Where Plant 2 used to stand, the building that housed some of the most advanced radio and television production lines in America, there is a junkyard. Cars stacked on cars, metal on metal. Rust accumulating on the same ground where engineers once tested television signals and assembly workers built radios by the thousand. No plaque, no marker, no monument, just a fence and whatever someone piled behind it. Come back in 2002. The junkyard is mostly gone. In its place, a cleared lot, flat ground, weeds pushing through cracked concrete, a chain-link fence around nothing, the kind of place you drive past without turning your head because there is nothing left to make you turn it. That is what happened to Philco. Not a museum, not a memorial, not even picturesque ruins that photographers could turn into art. Just absence. The most thorough kind of disappearing a factory can do. Think about what stood there, a complex so large it had its own internal streets, buildings where thousands of workers clocked in every morning, assembly lines that produced radios, televisions, military electronics, experimental broadcasts. A place where someone in 1935 could stand on the floor and hear the hum of 1,000 sets being born at once. Where an engineer in 1952 could walk from the television lab to the transistor research wing to the Defense Electronics Department without leaving company property. Where a line supervisor knew every sound the building made and could tell you from 50 feet away if a machine was running a quarter second off rhythm. All of it, gone. The demolition did not make the evening news. Nobody chained themselves to the gates. No preservation society filed an injunction. No politician gave a speech about saving a piece of Philadelphia's industrial heritage. Plant 2 came down because it was cheaper to demolish it than to maintain it, and because nobody with the money or the motivation to save it stepped forward in time. That is how industrial heritage actually disappears in this country. Not in a moment of tragedy, in a series of practical decisions. Each one makes sense on its own. The building needs a new roof. The cost is not justified. The lot has tax liability. It is easier to clear it. The neighborhood needs something, but not this, not a crumbling factory that reminds everyone of what used to be here. So down it comes. Brick by brick, beam by beam, until the skyline closes over the gap and the gap becomes normal. The neighborhood absorbed the loss the way neighborhoods absorb all losses, without the option of looking away. The people who had worked at Philco, or whose parents had worked there, did not need a historian to explain what had been lost. They had watched it happen in real time. First the contraction, then the emptying, then the fence around the vacant building, then the demolition crews, then the cleared lot, then the weeds. A factory that is still standing, even if it is closed and dark, is at least a landmark. You can point at it and say, "My father worked there." That building meant something. A factory that has been demolished is a gap, and gaps do not hold memory. They erase it. You cannot point at a vacant lot and make a stranger understand what it used to mean. The story does not survive the absence of the building that held it. Walk the streets around C and Tioga today and count what is missing. Not just the factory. The lunch counters that fed the shift workers. The bars where they drank after clocking out. The bus routes that ran heavy in the morning and heavy in the evening because thousands of people needed to get to the same place at the same time. The small economy that orbits any major employer. The dry cleaners and the shoe repair shops and the grocery stores that existed because Philco existed. When the factory contracted, that economy contracted with it. When the factory disappeared, Pieces of that economy disappeared too, not all at once, in layers, the same way the company itself had faded. Slowly enough that each individual loss seemed manageable, but fast enough that by the time you added them all up, the neighborhood had changed in ways that could not be reversed. This is the part of the Philco story that does not fit in a business case study. The case study talks about market share and strategic overreach and the failure to focus. It does not talk about the woman who ran the sandwich shop across from the plant entrance and lost half her customers in a single year. It does not talk about the bus driver whose route got cut because there were not enough riders anymore. It does not talk about the kid who grew up hearing that Philco was where you went to get a good job, and then watched the place where that job was supposed to be get turned into a parking lot. Philco's failure was not just a corporate event. It was an urban event, and urban events do not end when the stock ticker stops moving. They keep going year after year in the streets and the houses and the schools around the place where the work used to be. The silence at sea and Tioga is not a metaphor. You can go there. You can stand on that ground. You can listen. And you will hear exactly what replaced the sound of America's biggest radio manufacturer. Nothing. Philco did not disappear because America stopped wanting technology. America wanted more technology than ever. Philco disappeared because the company that once simplified modern life could no longer simplify itself. Start at the beginning and trace the logic. 1892. A lamp shop, then batteries, then socket power, then radios. Each step followed from the one before. Each step made sense. A company that understood manufacturing looked at a booming market and said, "We can build this better and cheaper than anyone else." And it was right. By 1934, 1 in 3 radios sold in the United States said Philco on the dial. The battery company from North Philadelphia had become the voice of American evenings. That success created a belief. The belief was simple. If we can build it at scale, we can win any market. Radio proved it. The Ford car audio contract reinforced it. The wartime production confirmed it. Every piece of evidence said the same thing. The system works. Scale wins. Keep building. So Philco kept building refrigerators, air conditioners, televisions, transistors, computers, missile guidance systems. 9 product lines from a company that had conquered America with one. Each expansion made sense in isolation. Each one had a business case. Each one had champions inside the building who believed this is the future and we need to be there. And they were right about the future. Every single time. Television was the future. Transistors were the future. Computers were the future. Defense electronics were the future. Philco was not wrong about where the world was going. It was wrong about how many futures one company could chase simultaneously with one balance sheet. That is the trap. Being right about the direction and wrong about your capacity to get there. Philco saw the future more clearly than most of its competitors. It just could not afford to build all of it at once. RCA saw the same future and made a different choice. Television, one market, total commitment. While Philco was dividing its attention and its capital across 9 fronts, RCA was concentrating everything on the one front that mattered most. And RCA won. Not because it was smarter, not because it had better engineers, because it had focus, because it chose. Philco never chose. That was the fatal mistake. Not a dramatic blunder, not a corrupt executive or a fraudulent scheme or a single catastrophic product failure. Just the slow, steady refusal to choose. To say this is what we are, and this is what we are not. To kill a business line that was not working, so the ones that could work would have enough resources to survive. To accept that being good at manufacturing does not mean you can manufacture everything. 3 lessons from the silence at sea and Tioga. First, winning one era does not entitle you to win the next. Philco mastered radio with assembly line discipline and aggressive pricing. Those skills were necessary for television, but not sufficient. Every new era demands that you earn your position from scratch. Your brand buys you time. It does not buy you forever. The families who trusted Philco for their radio did not owe Philco their television purchase. They bought whatever worked best and cost the right amount. And increasingly, that was not a Philco. Second, diversification without focus is not strategy. It is expensive panic. Every product line Philco added seemed smart in isolation. Refrigerators leveraged the dealer network. Computers leveraged the engineering talent. Defense contracts leveraged the wartime reputation. Each one made sense alone. Together, they were a trap. 9 businesses competing for the same pool of capital. 9 fires and 1 bucket of water. You do not put out 9 fires with 1 bucket. You watch 8 of them burn while you save 1. Philco tried to save all 9 and lost them all. Third, the market does not care about your legacy. It does not care how many radios you sold in 1934. It does not care about your experimental television broadcasts in 1932. It does not care about your wartime service or your engineering talent or the beautiful cathedral cabinets that once sat in millions of living rooms. The market cares about one thing. What are you offering right now? Today? This quarter? And if the answer is 9 mediocre products instead of 1 dominant one, the market will find someone else. It always does. Philco did not die when radio died. Radio did not even die. It just moved aside, made room for television, and kept going in a diminished role. Philco died when a company built for one kind of industrial certainty tried to survive an age that demanded a different kind entirely. It died because breadth became burden, because confidence became habit, because the factory kept running long after the strategy had stopped working. The empire that helped America hear the modern world could not hear the warning inside its own walls. The assembly lines were too loud. The product launches were too frequent. The expansion plans were too exciting. And by the time the noise died down enough for anyone to listen, there was nothing left to hear. At sea and Tioga, the silence is not empty. It is historical. It is the sound of a company that tried to be everything and ended up as a cleared lot behind a chain-link fence. If you are building something right now, if you are running a company, or managing a team, or launching a product, hear what the silence is saying. It is not saying, do not grow. It is not saying, stay small. It is saying, choose. Pick the fight you can win. Fund it completely, and let the other fights go before they drag you under. Philco could not do that. The belief that scale conquers all was too deep in the walls. And the walls are gone now. Drive to sea and Tioga. Stand where the factory stood. Listen. That is the last product the empire made. Silence.